Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Sea Hag. This is a 4-cost action and attack card from Seaside, and it says, each other player discards the top card of their deck, then gains a curse onto their deck. When you first look at Sea Hag, you should probably get the impression that it looks pretty good. So first of all, it's a junking attack, and that's a very strong thing to do. I did say once, possibly all the way back in my Witch video, that junking attacks are one of the strongest things that a card can do, because junking attacks are very, very harsh. They are probably one of the strongest types of attack around. This costs 4, which means that you can buy it turn 1 or 2, and normally with junking attacks, you want to get them as early as possible to really slow down your opponent's ability to get control of their deck. The curse, when it is gained by your opponent, goes on top of their deck. That is the harshest place that they could possibly gain a curse. Normally when the curse goes to the discard pile, then they have to draw through their deck and shuffle, and then finally the curse will actually start to impact them. But when it goes on top of their deck, it impacts them straight away. Sometimes that's a lot sooner. So that's, a really good place for you to put their curses. So by these metrics, Sea Hag is going to look like a very strong card. In fact, historically, when people were first ranking Dominion cards, Sea Hag was considered one of the strongest of 4-cost cards around. That's certainly not the case anymore, but it definitely was once upon a time. So there's a big secret catch with Sea Hag, and the big downside is that when you play Sea Hag, it does nothing for you. It gives no direct benefits. You compare with, say, Witch. That draws you 2 cards. But Sea Hag, it does nothing at all. As far as your own deck quality is concerned, if you buy a Sea Hag on turn 1 or 2, then your turns are going to be as good as if you had bought a curse, right? You're not building a functioning deck, right? It's not drawing you cards, it's not giving you economy, it's not trashing cards from your deck. You aren't actually improving things yourself. It's not helping you hit those important price points like 5. Right, it is just you draw it into your hand, and now your turn is worse for you in terms of what you can achieve. Of course, the trade-off there is that you're trying to give your opponent junk cards, which are really bad for them. But it is actively slowing down your ability to gain control of your deck as well. So there's a big question that you want to ask when you have Sea Hag in the kingdom. And that is, how willing are you to slow down your own building in order to give curses to your opponents? So there's no one real answer to this question. It is very heavily dependent on what else is available in the kingdom. So let's take a look at some reasons why you might want to buy Sea Hag straight away. So these are all things that will push you towards opening with Sea Hag. So curse trashing might be very poor. Let's say, for example, the only trasher is remodel. That's really bad at getting rid of trashes. Getting rid of curses, excuse me. Or maybe there's just no trashing available at all, which will happen sometimes. There's no high priority 5-cost cards that you want to get straight away. So cards like Sentry, normally it's super important that you buy them as soon as you can. And if you are buying Sea Hag, then it's hurting your ability to hit 5 early on. Well, if you don't need to hit 5 straight away, then that's not such a big deal. Another reason is that there's just no engine to build. It's what we call a weak board, where there's not really much going on. You're just going to be cycling slowly. You can't really draw all of your cards. Maybe there's no villages, and all the draw is terminal. What are you going to be doing on the board? Well, Sea Hag's a lot better there, because curses are really bad there. In fact, points 1 and 3 here are essentially ways in which curses become very, very nasty indeed, right? The weak boards, and where you can't trash them, they will absolutely destroy your opponent's deck and any semblance of them having good turns. So when cursing is really, really harsh, like Sea Hag, you get to open with it and start cursing them straight away. That's pretty good, and that's the sort of reason why you would want to get Sea Hag. I was going to do a slide where I then went through reasons to not open Sea Hag, but I realised they were just the opposite of these. So, on the converse, if there are really powerful 5-cost cards that you want, then maybe you just want to delay getting a Sea Hag, not open with it. And sometimes you might never get around to actually getting it. Like, everyone gets their deck under control really quickly. Cards like Sentry will certainly help towards that. And in that case, you know, what's the Sea Hag doing? Not very much. There's probably just better things to buy. So it's important that we focus again on the impact that Sea Hag has upon you. Right, so when your opponent is top decking curses, you might think to yourself, oh, you know, that stops them from hitting 5 because they're going to draw a curse on like turn 4. Like if you played Sea Hag on turn 3, and that dead card in their hand really stops them from going ahead and like buying their 5 cost cards. But you've got to realise that Sea Hag is doing the same to you initially. When you draw it, that is also blocking up your hand. It's difficult as well to justify buying multiple Sea Hags to try and win the curse split than it is with other junking attacks, like, say, Witch. And that is because of the way that Sea Hag doesn't do anything for you. So if you considered saying, you know, oh, I want to win the curse split, so I'm going to buy a second Sea Hag, and then in the end you only win the curse split 6-4, well, if your opponent has 1 Sea Hag and you have 2, you know, you now have 2 worthless Sea Hags in your hand that aren't doing anything compared to your opponent's 1. So while you have 6 junk cards now, which is 2 Sea Hags and 4 curses, your opponent has 7, which is 6 curses and 1 Sea Hag. So they've actually only got 1 more junk card than you do, right? The improvement you made was actually only have 1 less rather than 2 less that you would expect to do if you won the curse split. So you also spent an extra buy and 4 money on this card that you're not using anymore. So Sea Hag, you don't see people buy multiple copies of them often. It can be the case. Now you might say to yourself, okay, well what about if I use something like Remodel to try and then turn the Sea Hag into something better? And in decks where curses are really harsh, it's probably very difficult to actually pair up Sea Hag with some cost-relevant trashing, like Remodel, because you just can't draw your deck, right? And you've got all these curses that come in very quickly. So it's not always as good as it sounds. So be very careful before you buy like a second Sea Hag, just because they are pretty bad for you as well. Now, what impact does top-decking curses have as far as, say, getting rid of them goes? Some trashers are actually very good at trashing curses off the top of your deck. So if you have Lookout in your starting hand, this is the classic example because it's also in Seaside, you know, but it's also non-terminal and it trashes directly from the top of your deck. So if your opponent plays Sea Hag, you have a Lookout in hand, you get to trash the curse immediately, and you never actually drew it into hand. Now, of course, it is still slowing down your trashing, because now you have to trash a newly gained curse instead of like an estate or a copper that you started with. So, you know, it's still hurting you, but it's actually not as bad as the more typical trasher where you have to draw the curse into your hand before you can actually trash it. Now, another example I wanted to call out is Doctor. This also trashes from the top of your deck, but it's important to note that Doctor is terminal. It doesn't give you an action back. And that means that actually it's not as good as you might think, despite trashing from the top of your deck. And that is because that's the only action you're going to play that turn if you open with it. And if you want to play a village first instead, and it's like a normal village that also draws you a card, well, now you're going to draw the curse, and suddenly the curse is no longer on top of your deck anymore for you to actually trash with Doctor. So Doctor's not quite as good as you might initially think. So even though Lookout can be, it's worth noting that some trashers can be very significantly worse at trashing curses when they get top decked. So Sentry is an example, because Sentry draws a card first before it looks at the top of your deck. So Sentry actually really struggles to get rid of curses through Sea Hag. I know we explained it in the Sentry video, but when it comes to normal junkers like Witch, sometimes you get your deck under control fast enough that the curses start coming into your discard pile, and you can wait in your turn to play Sentry until it's going to find that curse in your discard pile. Like if it's the only card, like you're drawing your deck every turn, you can wait towards the end of your turn to play Sentry, and you can guarantee trashing the curse every time without ever having to draw it. But you can't do that with Sea Hag. That is because the Sentry is always just going to draw the curse first. So Sea Hag also does this whole thing where it discards the top card of your deck, and what does that mean for us? Well, I wouldn't say it's particularly helpful or hurtful on average. The main reason why it's there is to basically stop multiple Sea Hag plays, causing this massive stack of curses on top of your opponent's deck. Right? It means when the second Sea Hag is played, the curse that was on top gets discarded. Sometimes you will discard your opponent's Sea Hag through sheer luck. That's really good for you if you manage to do that. Obviously, you can't rely on it at all, but it does happen. Like, it's just very swingy when it does. Like, just well done. You know, good luck to you. It sets back your opponent quite a bit. It's just a thing that Sea Hag does, I'm afraid. Now, once all the curses have gone, you should probably stop playing Sea Hag. The discarding, like I say, it's neither really here nor there. But what it is doing when they aren't gaining a curse anymore is that it is actually cycling them one card through their deck. Right, they are actually getting one card closer to their shuffle. And you might actually be skipping over bad cards, like maybe you accidentally discard a curse that just happened to be on top of their deck anyway, or like a province. Sure, you could discard good, powerful cards like laboratories or golds or whatever, but you are just as likely to actually help them out. So typically you just sort of stop playing Sea Hag. Right? You don't have to play it just because it's in your hand and you have a spare action. I just wouldn't bother. Like, you will remember the times when it helped your opponent rather than when it hurt, and it's sort of a wash either way, so just, you know, I wouldn't bother personally. It doesn't mean anything, is the wide strategic implication. Yeah, sometimes they can actually benefit, like there's Village Green or Tunnel, and then it's like, oh, hey, you know, I get to react to this, but in general, like, you know, it's not really meaningful. So in summary on Sea Hag, it is weaker than it might first initially seem, but sometimes it is still very strong. When curses are very strong in general, Sea Hag also tends to be very strong, right? If it's okay to only care that it's only doing junking for you, then Sea Hag's a pretty good junker in that regard, right? Most other junking attacks tend to be better than Sea Hag just because they are doing other things for you. Like, would I rather get Sea Hag in the opening, or would I hope to pick up a Witch on turn 3 and 4? And honestly, I'm probably going for the Witch, just because I'd much rather have a Witch in my deck than I would a Sea Hag. Sea Hag initially hurts your turns just as much as it hurts your opponent. Right? When you consider your very first ever Sea Hag play, well, now both you and your opponent will have drawn a bad card during their first shuffle. Right, so it only really gets better after you've played it multiple times. So it is a little, I mean, it's not slower to get going because your opponent draws the curses sooner, but in terms of your deck looking appreciably better than your opponent, it actually takes a little while until Sea Hag results in you being in that situation. So there you go, so that's all I really have to say about Sea Hag. So what we are going to do now is we are going to head over to the online client and we are going to generate some kingdoms that have Sea Hag in it, and we are going to consider how good it is in those kingdoms. So in this kingdom we have Masquerade to trash. That's a pretty good trasher. We also have Ironworks, which can gain like mills, and it can gain conspirators, so there's a pretty good engine here. The only village is nobles, but there is like wharf and patrol. So these are pretty expensive cards. However, I don't feel like I'm in any rush to get these straight away. I'm opening Ironworks and Masquerade for sure, and then I can just Ironworks mills for a little while and also get like a second Masquerade and start thinning. I don't really see any reason to get Sea Hag here, if I'm totally honest, because, you know, for a while I'm just going to be milling and getting Masquerades and trying to thin, and the village takes a long time to get, and the fact that the Sea Hag costs me an action and then the curse is just going to get swung straight back at me with Masquerade means that Sea Hag is actually looking pretty bad here. I don't think I'd bother with it. By the time I would have the spare actions, and I really want to be spending my actions on Wharf and Masquerade, but by the time I eventually get around to doing that, right, and having the action spare, I don't think I care about Sea Hag because the decks are pretty thin, and Masquerade makes it very easy to just pass the curse straight back at your opponent. So, yeah, we need War for +buy. We've got Outpost as well, with like lots of conspirators, so eventually we will have a pretty good engine going. Like Wharf and Outpost is also very, very good. So I think I ignore Sea Hag here, and we just focus on building the really good engine that plays a lot of conspirators, that draws a lot of cards with Nobles and Wharf, plays an Outpost, thins with Masquerade, gets a bunch of points from these two cards. Yeah, so I think I'm ignoring Sea Hag here. I think if you buy Sea Hag, it gets in the way of trashing your own deck, and you're actually just going to fall behind. You really want to be ironworksing a bunch of stuff and hopefully getting up to Nobles at some point. Here we have no trashing. There is Native Village to sort of pseudo trash, and what you can do is you can, when the curse goes on top of your deck, you know that you can just set it aside with Native Village and then it's gone. The problem is that Native Village is your only village, and if you're going to have a game with a lot of villages, well, there's Bridge, right? But the thing is that there's no draw. I don't think a Bridge engine is actually going to work here because there's no trashing outside of Native Village, and there's only so much we can do with the whole Native Village thing. There's Pearl Diver to try and get tricks out of it. Outpost seems bad here. What do we do? Like, what is Artisan going to be getting for us? Like, I just don't see the Bridge stuff working out. I don't even see Lurker working out, honestly. Like, there's no draw, so Lurker's pretty bad here. Do we want, like, Gardens? I really don't think Bridge Gardens is a particular combo, right? But maybe what we do... I think this is a good board for Sea Hag. I think it's a good board because there's nothing else going on and you can't really deal with the curses. And it will eventually move into just trying to get a bunch of Gardens, I guess. Right? Like, am I happy to have an Artisan? Sure, I can pick up duchies with it. But I'm probably opening Sea Hag and Silver. I don't really see much value in Smugglers here as well. And I'm going to be buying a bunch of Caravans initially, and I trust trying to play Sea Hag as much as I can, just the one. And then I'm going to shift into, like, maybe I manage to pick up an Artisan at some point, maybe I never get to hit 6. And I just start buying green, and it's just kind of a slog where you throw curses and then you can't actually get anything done. In this deck, like, that seems most likely to me what's happening. I'm probably picking up a Bridge at some point, and I will just buy like a copper or two, because eventually I'm going to start going in on Gardens. I guess that's kind of it. Like, would I prefer Smugglers over Bridge? I don't think so. I think I'm happy with the Bridge. But I'm not getting it straight away. I just want to play the Sea Hag, and maybe I just go with Caravan as well, which is fine here. It's not actually that good. Do I want Caravan over just a bunch of Silvers? Maybe I'm just buying Silver a lot, and I'm doing that and then shifting into buying Gardens a lot, and then Estates and probably Duchy, and then the Curses run out as well. And then, so Gardens, Estate, and Curse are probably what are going to run out. Like, is that it? Maybe Bridge is fine, you can like buy double Estate or whatever, I guess. It's a very sad board. So this is a very weak board. There's nothing going on, there's no engine, and that means that Sea Hag is very good. As well, you can't curse. And there's also no high priority 5s, right? So there's all those 3 things that I listed, and this is a board for it. So I'm opening Sea Hag here, and I guess I only get 1. If my opponent tries to make me win the curse split, well, you know, there's Gardens. So, right, a weak board with Gardens, maybe I don't care that I lose the curse split. So Sea Hag was good there. Here we have Steward to thin. There is no village at all. There is Laboratory for draw. We can't Tactician because, Tactician is a village, but not if you're playing it on another Tactician. And we couldn't double Tactician here because there's no form of money, because there's no village. Steward is very good at thinning, so maybe we don't care for Sea Hag. What I would really like to do is play a lot of Laboratories, and then what? Is like Explorer the terminal of choice eventually, and we just look to single province? Like, how do we buy more than 1 card per turn? Well, it's only through Tactician, but this is a board where you have to give up your turn to play Tactician. There's also Outpost, but I mean, if you get really thin and you have a bunch of laboratories, maybe Outpost is the card that you play, and you are essentially using it as a second buy. And what we're trying to do is buy as many laboratories as we can and a single Outpost, and we have like a silver and 2 golds to hit province, and then we outpost and we try and do it again. Like, maybe that's all we're doing on this board. I don't think Duchy Duke is going to win. I think Steward's probably good enough. Well, having said that, when I trash for Steward, what am I picking up on my turns? Not much. I think I open Steward Silver, or possibly Steward Wishing Well might be better. I do think I want a silver at some point, though, so maybe it's just silver. And, you know, I'm not convinced by the Sea Hag here, because terminal space is too tight. I would rather just play Steward and get thin, and if my opponent buys a Sea Hag, well, they're also having bad turns, but they continue to have them while I just get rid of the curses. Yeah, so maybe I open Steward and Silver, or Steward Wishing Well initially, and then I will pick up a silver. And I just want to be buying a bunch of laboratories, and then eventually I get an outpost when I think it's time to stop playing Steward. If my opponent is Sea Hagging me, then I'll be playing Steward for a little bit longer to trash those curses. And we're just going to draw up, and we're going to buy golds, and we're going to buy 1 province a turn, and I think that's going to win. Like, if my opponent tries to do Sea Hag and then like Duchy Duke, it's going to take them forever, and they're going to stop playing Sea Hag on me very much. So then I can just start doing like the outpost thing. So I think that's kind of all we're doing here. A very weak board. I would ignore Sea Hag on this board. There are just better things to use my terminal space on, things that actually help me. Maybe the Steward gives me money at some point, I don't know. Here we have Steward and Upgrade for trashing. There is Throne Room as the only village. There's also Tactician. So we can do a double Tactician deck. We have Market, we have Bridge. I would like to throne a lot of bridges, and Tactician's going to be very good for that. So I'm going to open Steward, and I'm going to open Silver, I think. Unless I double Steward, but I think it has to be silver. We are going to want Throne Rooms and Markets. We want double Tactician. It's nice to have an Upgrade to help keep thin. Upgrade is nice if our opponent tries to Sea Hag us. If we have it in our hand, we can draw the curse and immediately trash it. And eventually that's going to be nicer than playing Steward. We are going to try a double Tactician deck with Market, Throne Room and Bridge, and we're going to try a Bridge Megaturn that eventually hits Province. Now, because I'm opening with Steward and I'm trashing, I do not care that much about hitting 5. I'm not worried at all if I get Cut Pursed, so I'm not opening Cut Purse. I'm opening Steward and Silver, and I will eventually hit 5, and I guess I'm buying an Upgrade or maybe a Market first, like one of them, and then I will try and shift into double Tactician. I need enough... Well, I need a Throne Room, a Market, and a Steward to be able to hit 4 to actually start double Tacticianing, so that I can continue to pick up like Throne Rooms and Bridges and stuff, like if I have to. So I do need these cards before I can start Tacticianing. So we're just going to be a while where we try and thin. And I don't see any other strategy that could compete with the Bridge Megaturn here. This is actually going to get set up a lot faster than you think, because soon you're going to start having these really, really good turns with Bridge, where you're just grabbing a whole load of these cards, and then for your opponent, it's like, hey, what happened? You know, all of a sudden, it's like, wow, the game just ended. Right, that's what's going to be happening. And with Market, and you're throning some, and then you're trying to play like a big throne stack on Bridge, it's very quick to get Province down to a very, very cheap cost, and then you just buy a whole load of them, and that's it, you win. So... no Sea Hag here. There's no time for Sea Hag here. There's too much important stuff that you need to do to set up a double Tactician deck, and I don't need to curse my opponent because I would rather focus on just playing more bridges. I'm going to pick up Bridge every time over Sea Hag, and then bang, suddenly I buy all of the provinces, and whoa, what happened? Right, the game's over. So, Sea Hag, too slow. This is a explosive board. This is the big problem for Sea Hag there. Too explosive for Sea Hag. Here we have Ambassador to thin, so we also have Sentry, very powerful cards, The village is nobles. Nobles is also the only draw. No, there is diplomat, excuse me, which is village and draw. But the problem with diplomat is, how do we get our hand size low? Well, there is ambassador and militia as attacks. And when we have diplomat in hand, we can do the sifting thing, and then we can get a village effect out of diplomat. So diplomat seems quite nice here. We are definitely opening ambassador to thin, because both players should be opening ambassador unless they get a 5-2, where I guess you might get a sentry first. I'm not that worried about hitting 5. The thing is that I do actually need money in my deck to eventually get to like nobles, which is going to be really important. I do want as many nobles as I can get, even though I also want some diplomats. And for that reason, right, another thing that can trigger diplomat is that you have multiple nobles in your hand that you play as villages, and then you play diplomat, and then if you draw more nobles, you can play them all for draw. So we have a way to draw. There is no plus buy. I wonder if I'm going to be playing bandit to earn golds eventually, and maybe give my opponent a bit of an attack, and I will eventually buy 1 province per turn, but I want to be getting a load of nobles first and diplomats. So I'm going to open ambassador and silver. Or is it just like double ambassador? No, I think it's ambassador silver, and then maybe I do pick up another ambassador at some point. But I can't see me really going Sea Hag here, because ambassador is also junking, but it's also thinning me as well. Like, when am I playing the Sea Hag? I don't really have the terminal space straight away, so it kind of just has to be ambassador instead. So Sea Hag's just a worse junker than ambassador, so it loses out, is all that's really the case here. Anyway, yeah, so that was those 5 random kingdoms, and as you can see, Sea Hag not as good as I think people sometimes think. Like, there was a game where it was very, very good. All of those 3 things that made you want to open Sea Hag were present. Curses were very nasty, there was no engine, and it was super good. But otherwise, like, sometimes there's just very powerful action cards that just get in the way of playing Sea Hag, because you're not getting any benefit. It's eating up your whole action, and it's doing nothing for you, and games just get to control the curses too quickly before Sea Hag gets to do anything, right? You buy Sea Hag and you're not, like, ambassador thinning in this example if you want to play Sea Hag, and like, you can't do that. So yeah, Sea Hag not as good as you think. There's the big key takeaway here. Anyway, thank you for watching this. I hope this was useful for you, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.